You're listening to the Valley Current.
So welcome in. Let's just get started right away because I think you are the expert at using Zoom video in your mediation practice, and you've been doing it now for a while. I'm going to guess you've done over 100 mediations, but you'll give us the number. But I'm kind of interested in the journey of how you got there, like literally from the point in which you graduated from high school. Did you know eventually you would always be a mediator? I know it was 3 years ago.
No, it's kind of funny. I've been doing it, I think, probably 15 years. That's a regular practice. I retired from the bench 16 years ago, and I wasn't going to do any mediations at all. Didn't think I had the skill set for it. And I was asked to do pro bono mediations or settlement conferences as a retired judge. So I started doing them.
Right.
Up until this year, I was doing anywhere from 50 to 80 a year. And after about 4 or 5 months, I started getting calls from lawyers saying, well, your name didn't come up on the roster, but we don't like the retired judges there. Would you do this for money? And I said, well, that's a language I understand. And, yes. So at the suggestion of a friend of mine, I had gone to Pepperdine's 6-day course for a couple of weekends over at Long Beach, I guess. It was not at Pepperdine's campus. It was a hotel near the Long Beach airport, as I recall. So I got interested in it and just kind of honed my skills doing pro bono work for a number of years. And a lot of mediation training recommends against that. I think it's a good idea. Get your name out there. It lets you test your skills. So I started doing it. Then I started doing some arbitration. And now I'm probably at about 70% mediations and about 30% arbitrations. I was asked a couple of years ago to join the London School of International Arbitration. I think simply because I'd attended some of their training and they may have seen what I was doing. I hadn't had any work directly from them, but I think it's actually helped my arbitration practice when they see that you belong to an international arbitration association like that.
Right. I did the same thing. I did a lot of pro bono work for the federal and state courts. And in my opinion, that's the way to do it. That's the training. And then you'll get calls from people that say, hey, you did such a great job.
Exactly.
But you had been a judge, and I think you told me at one point you were on the criminal bench and then a civil bench, like you did some rotations, right?
We rotated normally every 2 years. So I started on criminal about 18 months. And I went to family court for 5 years. And then I left family. I know. It's interesting. And I was the presiding family court judge for about 2.5 of that 5 years. Then went from there to juvenile court and then rotated back to the civil bench and spent another 8 or 9 years on the civil bench. And Arizona created a complex litigation court, similar to what California has. And I was one of 3 judges that did that. When the agreement was with the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court and our presiding judge, that the 3 of us would be selected. We get some additional training, but we had to learn to do everything paperless. And this was in 2000.
Wow. So you were way ahead of other people going paperless then.
Well, I'll give credit to another attendee at the SILS program. Colin Campbell was the presiding judge. He pushed everyone, the judges and the clerks, to do this early. He worked out a deal with LexisNexis where they would give us training. We would experiment with them on their paperless dockets, that sort of thing. Excellent training provided by Lexis. And I know I was learning to wean myself off of paper by getting a monitor that would rotate. So I'd start out with a portrait and gradually went to a landscape type of setting. But it was
right. We actually represented the company that built that patented display. And unfortunately, it didn't catch on, but it was sort of a way to see documents in different ways, spreadsheets in different ways. It was actually a phenomenon at the time, but it hasn't actually caught on. It didn't catch on for some reason. I don't know why.
Well, that's too bad because it was extremely helpful to me. So about 2000, 2001, we started doing it. We went completely paperless. but you could only get in front of one of the three of us. And we had rules for the complex litigation court. We spent a lot of time meeting with the lawyers, not on motions, but kind of informal organizational meetings to move things along.
Like procedural mediation is what you were doing.
Exactly. We get everybody in the courtroom. I remember I kind of did one with probably 60 different parties, a huge construction case. But it was no motion practice. Just tell me what discovery issues you're having. This is what then I'll say, this is what I'm thinking. And so if you file your motion, this is kind of what I think would probably happen. And it moved the cases along a lot faster. A lot more of them are settled. Well, and we would discuss.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't realize that when the judge is listening to the case and the litigants feel heard, that's like half of the path to settlement, because people want to believe that they're being heard, and they often just want to make sure they're being heard. And that's a big function of being a mediator or a judge, in my opinion.
I agree with you. And also it requires good lawyers, not just the judge, but when you've got really skillful lawyers, and I include a lawyer's skill to understand mediation, when it's appropriate, when to go to mediation, and how to prepare your client for it from day one. I think that's a real skill set a lawyer should have. I'm talking about the one that the hardcore litigators have to understand mediation.
Well, and often that's not really taught in law school. I think now it's starting to catch on. And it's actually caught on more in business schools. We've supported it in both business schools and law schools on a pro bono basis through the Foundation for Creativity, the nonprofit in dispute resolution. But let me just ask you, you had a career before as a U.S. attorney, even before you made it to the bench, right?
I did. I was I was in Atlanta, Georgia, studying for the Georgia bar when the Department of Justice offered me a job at twice what the law firm was going to pay me. So I ended up going to Washington, working for about a year and a half with the criminal division, and then about a year with the civil rights division. And they transferred two of us to Arizona to do a grand jury investigation involving fraud, federal money going in and out of Native American reservations. So the local U.S. attorney at the time in Arizona hired both of us, myself to do civil work for the U.S. attorney, and the other guy to do criminal. And interestingly, he just retired as a trial judge here in one of our rural counties, a guy named Gary Scales from Montana. And so I did civil for probably 18 months or so, and then the new U.S. attorney transferred me back to criminal. Did that for about 5 years, I guess, more, and then left and went with a firm in Phoenix doing construction law and plaintiff's work, personal injury. Then I left, formed my own firm, and then became a judge in 1989 when the local legislature, a Republican legislature, impeached a Republican governor, knowing that there was a Democrat next in line to be the governor. And she appointed 9 of us right away. And I think our only skill set was had to be Democrats in a Republican state. And that's how I got to teach. Yeah.
So you've got over 30 years of judicial experience, both on the bench as well as doing mediation, arbitration, and you've got another, it sounds like another 20 years of experience doing law before hitting the bench.
I probably had about 16 years, I guess, 16 or 17. I was in the military before law school, so I had about a 4-year stint with the military. I was going to be career military right out of college. And at that time, you were either you joined the military or you were drafted, or this was the 60s and 70s. So I spent a little over 3 years, not quite 4, in the military, and got out and went to law school.
So you're going on over 50 years of legal experience from just my rough counting here.
Except I was not a JAG officer in the military. I didn't do that. I was qualified as an Army Ranger, so I switched my time between cavalry units, armored units, and infantry assignments. And then I ended up in the reserves. I had a regular Army commission, but to get an early release for law school, I agreed to go in the Army Reserve. So I spent the next 26 years as a reservist, teaching mostly as adjunct for remote faculty for the Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, the Army Staff College. And that's was my weekend job, if you call it, was teaching tactics. at various universities, Reno, University of Nevada, Reno, Idaho State University, at Fort Leavenworth, Staff College.
Teaching,
So it was
teaching law, or what were you teaching?
I was teaching tactics for the most part. Occasionally I teach military history, but it was military planning and tactics. And then I commanded a reserve unit that specialized in teaching non-resident staff work, not teaching non-resident students the Army planning process, tactics, and operational tactics.
And then let's race forward to when did you actually formally start what you call fields mediation, which is, you'll describe it to us, but as I understand it, it's your virtual delivery of both mediation and arbitration services.
Right. This was about 2008 I started. And at that time, it was mostly in person. I was paperless. I didn't have an office and had no staff. And the only way you could engage my services was to agree to sign up through, I had my own program for a while, an online calendar before I went with the National Academy of Distinguished Neutrals. I've now used their online calendaring program. But I had a designer, the web designer, and software engineers come up with a program where they could you could book me as an arbitrator mediator with my own personalized online calendar. And I would go to the location that your office or a neutral spot if you wanted me to find the location, conference rooms, that sort of thing. And then in 2000, just before the pandemic hit, I guess 2019, I was asked by our local court to set up some training for judges, lawyers doing pro bono mediations. And I selected online training, working with Lynn Cole down in Florida. She's another online trainer and mediator in Tampa. So I got two lawyers to agree to waive the confidentiality in a subrogation insurance case. I'd worked with them before doing some mediations. And so we waived it. We put on this program in early February of 2020, how to do mediations using Zoom. And the three of us, the two lawyers and myself, working with Lynn, had to train ourselves to use Zoom. And so we put it on, and the comments, there were about 80 attendees, judges and lawyers. The comments for the most part, well, it was interesting, it's entertaining, but it's a toy, nobody's really going to do it. Well, by March, with the pandemic, our phones are going crazy. The three of us, we got a lot of calls. Did you videotape that? I wasn't paying attention. Could you do some additional training for me? So between Lynn Cole and myself, we were doing 3, sometimes 4 sessions a day through the National Academy of Distinguished Neutrals of lawyers around the U.S. and some in Canada that wanted to learn how to do Zoom mediations.
You were actually ahead of your time. You were literally a month or so ahead of the lockdown, doing stuff that the lockdown needed, right?
About that. And I'll have to give credit to, and one of our speakers this year at SILS is going to be Susan Guthrie. And Simon Bonet is one of the co-chairs of the SILS program mediation symposium this year. They've been pioneers in this, and nobody really paid any attention to the online mediation people. But they were way out there. And Susan, at the same time Lynn and I were teaching small groups at 10 or 12, she was, for the ABA and the NADN, was literally teaching thousands of people at a time, more in a lecture series, walking them through it. Lynn and I specialized in just a hands-on time, walking 10 people through a 2-hour session. Okay, it's your time to set up breakout rooms, that sort of thing, and kind of a hands-on skill set. So yeah, we were learning as we were doing it. As you know, anytime you're dealing with computers or online, it's you learn by your mistakes, and don't get worried about breaking a computer, because you're not going to break these things. You can go replace it or improve it.
Right. So you actually, to some degree, became one of the most experienced online teachers and actual practitioners of Zoom-based mediation. That's what I'm gathering from all this.
Myself, Lynn Cole, Susan Guthrie, and a lot of the family mediators, early days, they've been doing this for years. And as one guy described it to me, it was a matter of survival. I mean, they were using WebEx, go to meetings, some of the other stuff. But everybody's come around to Zoom because it's so versatile and so easy to use. I've used Blue Jeans, Google Meets, but I keep coming back to Zoom because I think it was Simon tells me there was a Zoom had coordinated with some mediator over in California, Silicon Valley, I think. Rule, his name, I believe is, that he suggested the breakout rooms. And that really has turned out to be a goldmine for mediators, being able to manipulate those.
When you look at your career and you look at where it's gone, now you've gone totally 100% virtual. You don't do in person anymore, do you? I've went
100%, but I keep getting calls. They really want an in-person one. So I said, okay, my preference, my plan is it's online. If you think we really need something in person, contact me and let's talk about the special circumstance that would justify it. And I found out that about half the time we get ready to do it, and the attorney's clients are like, you want me to fly where for a day to do this? And so the clients are pushing. Big commercial clients are going like, why should we do that? Why can't we appear by Zoom? We've done it in the past. And I think their clients, the lawyers' clients, are telling them, it's not the way things are done.
Right. It's pushing more efficiency. And I think the other thing that you've done is you put your whole set of documents and other things online using a system that's provided by an outside provider, right?
Yes. And that's NADN now they do all the calendaring work. And I'm also using an outfit that's a spinoff from NADN. It's called ADR Support. They're a Florida-based outfit. It's the literal back office from me. It's a paralegal that's available to work with the parties that want to engage me. They do all my booking, scheduling, billing, collecting. They give me tips on best practices. They've got 50 plus mediators around the U.S. and Canada now. They're supporting administratively online. And they're giving us best practice tips. So at the end of the year, beginning of the new year, January, they'll come out with a recommendation. This is what we found over the people we're supporting. You may want to think about raising your rates for your area, for example. Have you thought about doing this? All the books are the QuickBooks, so I get a check once a month from them for what they've collected. And they're using stay-at-home moms. That's one that works for me as a paralegal. So she's incredibly good. She's bilingual and very proactive and gets right on top of these things. So I think that's another, I guess, good thing. I won't say anything good came out of the pandemic, but the pluses that we learned from having to go through the pandemic. So online mediation does work, and also there are administrative support structure that's available to people out there.
Wasn't there another group that you were using at some point? Was that before ADR Support? Because I remember a different name at some point.
Yeah, there's another support, and it's called New Era ADR.
Right.
Yeah. 4 or 5 young lawyers that left a large national, international firm because they thought arbitrations were inefficient, overly expensive, and they thought they could do better. So they set this up. They do something similar to what AAA does. For example, they book everything. So I don't do anything. They collect all the documents, et cetera. If you're working with ADR Support crafts the documents that come to me to meet my standard. The contract that they get comes from me. Now, New Era, some of the others, DeMars and Associates is another one. I do some online arbitration and mediation for involving consumer auto lemon law stuff. Mm-hmm. They work similar to the AAA. There's a flat fee they collect that they pay you. The ADR Support is pretty much you send us your letterhead, tell us what you want your contract to say, we'll do it. And they design it for you. They also, this ADR Support team down in Florida has a web person, a stylist that will design rooms for you, like the virtual room I've got here behind me. So this is a very good support structure.
So you could almost do an analysis and comparison of all of this new infrastructure that to some degree might be replacing the American Arbitration Association and perhaps even JAMS, right? Who are the big elephants in the room. right?
Yes. And I tell you, if Jams and AAA don't get on this bandwagon, people go other places. And I get an awful lot of work now, arbitration, from people that simply don't want to pay those fees. They can go to me, an independent, sign up for me through the online calendar at NADN and pay a lot less. And the ADR support team takes a percentage of what they collect. It's not a flat fee.
I mean, it's quite a difference if you think about it, because this is all emerging now. In many ways, both JAMS and AAA, and to some degree, there's another company called ADR Services here in California, but I think they're national. Yep. They sort of believe the model was kind of a law firm model, and they had kind of a pyramid. I think they still have sort of a pyramid where they sort of say, hey, we have partners at the top that are, I know the AAA is a nonprofit, but it's a different approach. Whereas these new technology support platforms are really like taking over the back office. You don't need to have employees. You don't need to have offices. You don't need to have anything, right?
No, and even my IT support. There's a local. It's probably 20 years ago. Two guys graduated from Arizona State Universities with computer degrees. They set up a business called Data Divers. So I pay them $25 per month per computer for online as well as in-person support. So I have my IT support with them. They can come right into my computer, fix it. If it can't be fixed, I take it to one of their offices now, drop it off, and it's a flat 25, 75 a month, I think, per computer. And so if you look around, you don't need this office. You don't need these personnel, and you can get quite good people that want to work from home remotely, and it works quite well. If you get a team together, you can be any place. For example, I'm in Spain. I'm in Valencia, Spain now. I'm working on a mediation that we're trying to put it together between the Western U.S., Phoenix, and I think somebody else in the U.S., and one of the parties is in South Africa. So that wouldn't be possible except through Zoom and remotely. And the lawyers that happen to be working both sides of this case are very tech savvy. They do not want to do paper. Mm-hmm. They do not want to be in person. And they convince their clients, who are, one's a business person, the other is not, but it's a big family business dispute, that this is the way to do it. And so we can get this done quickly, and we don't have to wait till the mediator gets back from Europe.
So you're in Europe for other reasons, but you're still able to work, what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a delayed vacation, but yeah, I'll be working maybe on mediation. I'm finishing up an arbitration while I'm here too. Again, they're submitting everything, all the documents, papers to me online. So it's a pleasant way of working and getting a lot of things accomplished. One of the things I will say, if you're going to do this as a mediator, you have to learn the technology. You may be able to make it work with a background person, with your IT person, but you really have to understand computers, the laptop, Zoom, or Blue Jeans, or Google Meets, whatever you're going to use. You have to learn to manipulate it, because if you're in the middle of an arbitration, you don't want to have to depend on somebody else putting up a document. You want to be able to pull it up on your screen, share it. So with the lawyers, you're talking about it, or if they want to share it and it's something you don't happen to have as a submission, you can get a capture of the document or the whiteboard or whatever it is they're using at the time. The mediator arbitrator needs to know how to do this.
Is there any part of you that would like to go back to the in-person experience, assuming the convenience issue can be solved? Obviously, it's a big hassle factor now.
I really don't. I've got during the pandemic, I sold a house and disgusting amounts of money, and ended up buying a small condo in Phoenix and then another house down on the Arizona border. So I'm working remotely at a house up in near the National Forest, a wilderness area down on the Mexican-U.S. border. I've learned, you have to get the various mobile hotspots if your local cable connection is not very good. So I've had to learn a whole new trade, or if you will, or a new skill about locating good Wi-Fi connections and how to move between one and the other.
Well, you can get yourself a Starlink and carry it in a briefcase, and Starlink will get you satellite anywhere throughout the world. That's a must SpaceX innovation. That changes the game, right?
I'm glad you suggested. I hadn't thought of that, but that is something that definitely.
When you look at all these various infrastructure services, and it sounds like you've experienced a few, is there any doubt in your mind that eventually more and more independent mediators, independent arbitrators will go with this approach where they head off to either an ADR support or a new era or something else? I'll just put the new era thing up, and then we can go to ADR support. But they're out there. I mean, they're all in the same sort of class. They just do things a little differently.
It's however you want to feel. If some retired judges, retired lawyers, or other mediators that want to do nothing, just show up, this is fine. They can go, and they're just paid for, like with AAA or with New Era, that sort of thing. I prefer to have a little bit more hands-on to kind of craft it. I like the innovations and the learning something new with this whole process. I just don't see people going in that direction. I know a lot of I attended a meeting recently in Atlanta with the National Academy of Distinguished Neutrals, and their position is, well, if we go back, it's going to be kind of a hybrid situation. And I think one of these surveys that they did end of last year, 2022, indicated that about 70% did not want to go back to in-person. But 30% and growing a little bit, maybe up to 35%, want to go back to the old ways of doing things. And then there was a small group of that wanted to do a hybrid situation. But yeah.
So ADR support, new era, to some degree, I guess we might see ADR systems or services and maybe jams and maybe even the AAA head in this direction. But there are differences, obviously, because some are nonprofit, some are for-profit, and to some degree, they're enabling independence, right? They're enabling a degree of independence over time that you could have never imagined at the point that you were on the bench. I'm sure some about 15 years ago.
And with New Era, for example, that was the Solomon law firm. David Solomon is basically one of the founders of this, and he's running it. His father had a law practice, and then they started doing only mediations. And they completely, as I understand it, just given up their lease. They don't have a building anymore. And ADR Support has at least 50 mediators right now. And they had a 20-person mediation firm that was doing in-person stuff, an office structure, that sort of thing. And they've done a good job of moving in this direction. I think they're one of the innovators, and they've seen this meets and satisfies one thing that mediators at stable law firms have. They have a lot of conflicts, especially if it's a bigger national, international firm. If you leave and become an independent, you need a support structure like this. If you want to remain independent, to do all the things you couldn't do before. I mean, jams and some of the others, they charge a lot of money, but they have some substantial overhead. I think jams may even have full-time case managers.
Right.
And these are part-time case managers.
So when you look at how much work you're doing as a, retired judge, because that's what you are, but it doesn't sound like you're retired in your practice. Are you putting in a 2,000 hour a year, or what do you see that you're doing at this point?
No, I probably am doing about 8 months a year. I'm taking about 4 months a year off, and because I am retired, I also want to travel as much as I can and a lot of exercise, that sort of thing. But it's towards the end of 2022. I thought I was back full time. I was doing 5, sometimes 6 days a week. And that was, all of a sudden I realized I'm back at full time now. But I can do it any place I want to be. So that makes it easy to...
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.